Hi, I'm Natalie Rose, and welcome back to Wake Up, the channel that helps you think less about food in your body and more about truly living. This week, I'm really excited to bring on a guest speaker. Her name is Zoe Bisping. She is a psychotherapist based in NYC, a mom of three. She works with families to help them build body resilience and make peace with food. The reason why I believe this is so important because as a therapist myself who specializes in body image, I know that most body image issues stem from childhood. And so it's really, really important to have these conversations, whether you're a parent or not, of how to instill positive beliefs about your body, being able to have a protective shield against the inevitable body dangers in the world. For example, the unrealistic beauty standards, diet culture, and things like that. We're never going to be able to protect our children from those things, but we can help them build resilience against them. So I'm so excited to get into this. Another reason why I really wanted to speak to Zoe was because of the recent rise of SkinnyTok, which I've talked about in episode 6 of my podcast. Go watch it if you haven't yet. Now, I am speculating that part of the reason why the glorification of thinness and skinny culture is on the rise again is because many people feel like body positivity missed the mark. Body positivity failed them. And I've seen this through comments on SkinnyTok videos from people mentioning body positivity and saying, body positivity made me complacent or body positivity made me bingy. I can't just be someone who just loves their body and moves on. I feel cheated by body positivity. It didn't work for me. And I think what they mean is that they interpreted the body positivity movement as just a message that you should just love how you look and pursuing any kind of weight loss is wrong and just be okay with your body. And a lot of people are like, but I don't feel okay with my body. I want to change my body. And so I feel like SkinnyTok gave them another solution. It doesn't look like diet culture. It's sort of wrapped up in a different bow tie. It's weight loss under the guise of motivation and let's all be hot together and hot girl summer. And so I really wanted to talk with Zoe, who is a body image expert. Her handle on Instagram is My Body Positive Home. And I wanted to ask her what the body positivity movement really is about, whether you can find a balance between wanting to change your body and wanting to be body positive. And more so, I wanted to talk to her about what body neutrality is, what food neutrality is, how you can go about practicing these value systems and why they'd be beneficial in helping yourself and your family build body resilience. We also talk about practical strategies, ways that you can talk to your kids or young people about movement and food and exercise and weight gain in ways that aren't going to be harmful. Because as you know, if you've been listening to me for a while or following me, or you've been on a body image healing journey, you probably know that a lot of our stuff stems from childhood, from within the family unit, the people closest to us. So that's why I think this conversation is so important to have. I'm very excited about it, and I hope you are too. So let's get into the episode.
I'm okay. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. I would love to know a little bit more about you and how you got into this work.
Sure. So I am Zoe Bisping. I live in New York City. And I guess by day, I'm a psychotherapist. I specialize in eating disorders and body image issues across the lifespan with a particular subspecialty in child and adolescent eating disorders. So I've worked a lot over the course of my clinical career with young people and their families. And I guess I was sort of getting deeper into that work around the time that I had my first kid. And at the time, I started to become, I don't know, maybe hyper concerned about the risks of eating disorders and treating young people with eating disorders or anyone with eating disorders. They're just like hard. They're hard illnesses to have and to treat, and they're hard on families and individuals. And so I think at the time I got very fixated on like prevention literature. And I think through that, I discovered that there isn't really a thing. Prevention isn't really a thing, but increasing protective factors and decreasing risk factors is a thing. And it took me on an interdisciplinary journey because there's so much literature, whether it's on responsive feeding in the kind of nutrition space or learning from folks in fat liberation. There's adolescent medicine. Like there's all of these sort of dots that I wanted to connect. And that sort of over the past, however many years has become half of what I do, I suppose. So by day, I'm a therapist. By side hustle, I'm, I guess, a preventionist, and I do public speaking and education on the matter. And then, of course, I'm a mom. So I have 3 kids of my own that absolutely fuel my dedication to this. And I'm like in the trenches, body positively parenting them every day.
That's amazing. Yes. And so your handle on Instagram is My Body Positive Home. Do you mind actually if we talk a little bit about what body positivity is? Because I'm sure you've seen it, but there's been a huge rise in SkinnyTok and the glorification of thinness. And something that I see a lot of what's being commented around that are speculations about the reason why it has risen to fame again is because, quote unquote, body positivity failed us, or body positivity missed the mark. And I think what people mean is that from what I've seen, they felt like any conversations about wanting to lose weight were shut down, and they felt like they were being told you just have to love your body. So I think people confuse body positivity with body love or just love your body. But I know that there's so much more to that. Would you mind providing your thoughts behind body positivity?
Definitely. And I know exactly what you're talking about. And I see it in all directions. I think folks that connect more with fat positivity or body liberation, they feel like body positivity is not even inclusive enough. So you sort of get it on, I don't want to say they've misunderstood it, but I think that the essence of body positivity to me is merely a stance that all bodies, right, hold human beings, and that regardless of those bodies' size, shape, level of ability, gender expression, those bodies are worthy of the same access, love, care, respect, dignity, period. So body positivity, to me, it's a value system. It's just a belief that, you hear this, all bodies are good bodies, but the notion that we appreciate that there is no wrong or bad way to have a body, and that our society does not see it that way, right? There's body privilege, there's body oppression, but that if I'm body positive, and it's not really it doesn't have anything to do with loving my body. It's how I feel towards bodies. It's my stance towards bodies. And now I have a body. So the idea is that if I can actually have a stance that I believe all bodies are worthy of all of these things and that they are all inherently good, there is a protective element there, right? Because it will improve the way I conceive of my own body if this is sort of over time the values that I have. I think it's really misunderstood as this like toxic self-love or body love, because you can absolutely be body positive and struggle deeply with your body image. You can be body positive according to the way I defined it and want to lose weight. You might have some cognitive dissonance around that. A lot of my patients have some dissonance around that because they say, well, I want to believe that all bodies are good bodies. I actually do. I do believe this. And yet for me, I'm struggling. I can't accept my body as it is. Like, they're 2 different things, right? Body image and body positivity. They don't even exist on the same plane. So, I think it's tricky. And I know what you're talking about with skinny talk and this idea that, it's sort of a backlash to body positivity. But I think it does require us to at least clear up what do we even mean by this. And I'm thinking about body positivity more as a social justice movement, not a stance towards how I feel about my body.
I completely agree with that. And I think that when I've seen those comments or Skinny Talk creators talking about how the body positivity didn't work, I think that they are missing the point. They don't know that it was a movement that I think was really designed to help people in the long run. Because if a lot of people in larger bodies or marginalized bodies are facing discrimination and oppression and are not treated the same because of their body appearance or size, then they're not getting the support that they need. So I think part of the reason behind the movement was simply to allow everyone to receive the same kind of support. So if that means more access to healthcare or less weight stigma, which often drives people away from getting care because they don't want to just be told to go on a diet, or, oh, you're experiencing this pain in your knee solely because of your weight when it could be something else. So I think overall the movement was geared towards helping people. It wasn't about necessarily body image, like you're saying, or just this idea to just love your body and move on. So I think that that's where there's that huge misconception where they're actually missing the mark. And I think Skinny Talk is, kind of using that as an excuse to promote these really toxic views around weight loss that aren't even really coming from a healthy place.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think about, I don't know, like, I think it's perhaps, I'm trying to think, it's probably because I'm a therapist, but also maybe it's just how I feel. A therapist meaning I want to show up for anybody that's coming to see me without judgment or sort of I try to keep my values even in check because I want to make sure I have space for other people's value systems. But I really believe in body autonomy also. So I'm not sitting here judging people who choose to pursue weight loss if that's what they feel is going to help them fully actualize. I think you enter like GLP-1 medications into the conversation because that's a big part of where we're at. And just truthfully, I have noticed myself wanting folks to consider that before they consider diet, because at least we know that, I mean, with diet, it's just inevitably going to fail. I don't know what, we know less about GLP-1s, but I'd rather folks pursue medication that's going to help them desire more than try to deprive themselves. You know what I mean? So I think about even just like harm avoidance around that. But I'm not here to say that people can't actualize however they need to. I'm thinking about a woman I've seen on TikTok who's like gone on a huge weight loss journey with Ozempic and skin removal surgery. And like, she's talking very actively about how her life has improved dramatically. She is treated better. She doesn't face systemic oppression anymore. She can shop in regular clothing sizes. She'll say even her children are treated better now that she's in a smaller body. She's saying the world is really terrible to fat people, and my life is better now that I'm no longer fat, and I like it. And I could see people finding that problematic, and I think it is because it contributes to weight stigma. But she's also saying, like, this is how I've self-actualized, right? Is she I don't know. I mean, it's not for me to say, but I think you can believe that we're all deserving and also have experienced enough trauma in your own existence that you got to make the decisions you got to make in order to live your one and only life as best you can. So it's complicated, I think.
Oh, it's so complicated. Like there's no right or wrong answer. And I think it's so great to see everyone's perspective and to take it into account as well. Like when making an informed decision, for example, if someone was going to start a medication, I think in the work that I do with clients, is I see women who have struggled with disordered eating for so long and who have really attached their identity and their self-worth to being thin, and they've reached their goal weight and realized that, oh, all my problems didn't go away, and why do I still feel so insecure? And why do I actually feel worse and more self conscious about my body at this lower weight than I did at the higher weight? So I think that's just where I'd love to keep the conversation going, or at least that's what I try to talk about, in my little corner of the internet. And here is just to remind people that it's totally valid to want to feel good in your body from a physical standpoint. Like, you can't ignore, like you said, the way, thin privilege and how people are treated, and, these body ideals that are forever sort of changing in our society anyways, but to also know that there's a different kind of work that involves, your relationship with yourself and being able to accept yourself despite the judgment or maybe some of the experiences you've had with people in the past that have caused you to harbor negative feelings about your body.
Totally. I agree. And, it's like it in some ways that endless pursuit of weight loss, when it brings people, I don't know, it's almost like closer to a sense of, wow, there is something wrong, but it's not this. Like this sort of emptiness I feel, or the attachment trauma I experience, or, that pursuing it doesn't come from weight loss. Or, I mean, I know, because we sort of, it sounds like we treat a similar population in that way. But helping get people out of that, like out from under that, especially in a culture that's basically reinforcing that they pursue that, it's so confusing.
Definitely. So you work with parents mostly, correct? Adults?
I in Well, in my clinical practice with individuals mostly, and then some families as well. But in the prevention space, yes, parents.
Yes. So you find that you're working a lot with parents to almost like preventing disordered eating or unhealthy relationships with one's body image from occurring in children.
Yes. Increasing like protective factors, decreasing risk, and kind of connecting to what we were just talking about, hopefully nurturing such a strong sense of self and embodiment in our young people that they're just less inclined to be on that journey that we were just talking about, right? They might feel external pressures. I mean, we're not in denial about that, but hopefully nurturing kids with what I consider like body image resilience, so that they know how to, like, what the alternatives are when they're feeling they have those hard body moments, right? That they understand that it's not really going to be solved by shrinking, but rather more effectively coping.
Yeah. And that's so important because that's kind of where all of this starts, right? In childhood, I think, I always ask my clients, what is your first memory of when you felt like you started to look at your body a different way? And usually it's maybe a comment they received from a relative at a really young age, or witnessing their parents always on a diet, or eating disorders running in the family, and things like that. So I'd love to pick your brain about the work that you do with parents to help build that strong sense of self in children so that they don't face these same things. How would you describe food neutrality and body neutrality?
Mhm. So maybe with body neutrality, we could like not juxtapose it, but if we go back to the body positivity question. So if body positivity is like a value system, I think of body neutrality as um, kind of like us, like a personal stance, right? So having a body neutral practice, for example, might help a person um, not like cope with the negative body thoughts, or even those urges to try to change one's body. I think the idea of body neutrality is that I am worthy I have a body and my body is worthy of care and respect. Doesn't mean I love it, doesn't mean I love the way it looks, but I value it. And so I am inclined to take care of it. And so I think there's a sort of self compassion element of it. I think that with body neutrality, there can be a kind of functional element of it. Like I appreciate what my body can do for me. But the kind of goal of body neutrality is to just, strive for neutral, right? It's not realistic to feel neutral all the time. I think, though, it's a good thing to kind of reach for when we're having either hard body moments or thinking that our goal should be to love our bodies. It's sort of like lowering the expectations. And I do think that it's a bit more accessible to folks.
Yes, that's a really good point. It's not realistic to feel neutral all the time. Because I'm wondering if, as people are trying to practice body neutrality, sometimes there's a lot of perfectionism in this space. And, when you feel like you're not doing it right, or, you can feel like you're failing at it and you just want to give up. Like, okay, body neutrality didn't work for me. So that's a really good reminder that it's okay if you don't feel neutral about your body all the time. It's more of a practice. Is that what you're saying? And also
Definitely.
sometimes more realistic than striving for loving your body all the time.
Yeah, sometimes I think about not the continuum, but kind of. Like I think about body gratitude, body neutrality, and body grief as sort of existing on a continuum, or I kind of conceptualize them as part of resilience. So to be able to access gratitude, if you can, for maybe the function of your body, assuming that it functions, right? I think that can be a bit ableist if we're not careful. But to be able to access gratitude and then also to be able to access a kind of neutral stance, right? I can sort of tolerate being in my body right now. I can observe my body in a neutral way with descriptive language. Like I think there's a place for that. And then grief, to sort of contend with what I've lost or what I what I wish I had, but never did. Like I think they need to all be sort of bundled together. And so we think of neutrality as maybe one of the options, but that not without the others.
Totally. That makes a lot of sense. And I imagine, we're always kind of flipping through all of them because we have mixed emotions about our body. Like sometimes, like you said, we're grieving the kind of body we wish we had or that we never had. Maybe we're also grieving the way we've been treated for our body or mistreated, or also the amount of time, with clients, it comes up a lot, grieving the amount of time that has been wasted thinking or doing things, in the name of changing your body that, just kind of like caused you to not be present in experiences or miss out in experiences. So that's a really good point. Body grief.
Yeah, I think so. Food neutrality, I guess I think of maybe a little differently, but also a stance, like a stance that all food is good food, right? Or that all food is food. It's really about kind of taking morality out of food. So, as an eating disorder therapist, right, you can see the importance of this. And I think that where I think eating disorder therapy, what it gets so right is that it sort of invites people to think about the categorical thinking, right? That is sort of at the root of the kind of good, bad, healthy, unhealthy, which of course is everywhere in our culture. So if we're not actively embodying food neutral values and vibes at home with kids, they're just kind of growing up in environments that just make just set the stage for that problematic black and white thinking that some brains are going to latch onto and go down the eating disorder path. So I don't mean it literally. Obviously, if you're allergic to something, that's not a good food for you. And kale is nutritionally not equivalent to a Twinkie, but I don't think it's particularly healthy to feel super virtuous about yourself if you eat kale or super bad about yourself if you eat Twinkies. So it's really the practice of removing morality from food, which some parents mistake for a free-for-all, like a kind of permissive feeding style. And that's actually not accurate at all. It's really just a stance towards food. And then how we feed becomes a completely different topic, but a food neutral foundation is very protective.
Yeah. I imagine you must get a lot of resistance from parents because they grew up in diet culture as well. Like it's hard to just unlearn all the things that you've learned about food. I mean, even with food neutrality and body neutrality, I feel like that's something I can practice quite easily now. But when I was in the depths of struggling with my relationship with food and myself, it was like, no, like I don't like my body. This is wrong with my body, or that's a bad food, just because what you learn about food. And then when you're in a vulnerable place, it's so top of mind. Like it's almost like alarm bells are always ringing around food. It's like, it's not safe. It's hard to get to that neutral place, but something that you definitely work towards.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that the biggest resistance, which again, it sometimes the resistance is the misunderstanding of the message, right? I
Mhm.
sometimes have to say, like, I'm pro nutrition, like I'm pro health and well-being and safety for children. Like I'm even
You have to
pro,
remind people.
yeah, like dare I say pro balance, nutritional balance. I mean, that word is tricky because I think it can get, the perfectionism can kind of get wild in that word. But I have to sort of reassure people, no, I think food neutrality, it's actually the platform that I think will bring forth the most competent eating, which is a term that I think is useful with respect to feeding and like, what are we trying to do here? What kind of eaters are we trying to raise? Or if you have a kid that's highly selective or has sensory differences or ARFID, or, like we need to make sure that their food is respected too, So I try to help people see that whatever their resistance is, at first it might reflect a misunderstanding of what I'm saying. Um, and maybe it's like a mistrust. Well, how could we, if we kind of both want the same outcome, which is like a kid hopefully to grow up with a healthy relationship with food, which means like being able to eat without guilt and shame and get their nutritional needs met, and like have a modicum of balance, and dare I say ability to eat in moderation, but not because of rules, but rather because of body trust, right? When we can kind of go there, I feel like that finesse helps bring more people in. But to your point, it's true. These are deeply ingrained beliefs, and there's a lot of mistrust.
Yeah. And that fear and mistrust is what drives that black and white thinking that you mentioned before. Right. And it's almost like you can't help, but that's where your brain goes. If someone says, stop dieting, they think eat everything all the time. Or if you stop weighing yourself every day, you're going to gain massive amounts of weight and lose all control. Like it's like your brain will go to that other extreme when you're dealing with mistrust and fear around food. So I like the way that you framed that. It's the part of the point of food neutrality is not trying to equate kale with Twinkies, but to reduce the fear around food so you can build more trust. And with trust comes balance and healthy decisions that are not based in shame and fear.
Yeah, I like that.
Nice. Okay, I have some questions. I'm actually expecting my first child. And so
Congratulations.
thank you. And I feel like I've done a lot of work. I feel like I have a really healthy, balanced relationship with food in my body. And I'm having a boy. But I know, boys grow up in this culture too, and they're affected by it as well. And I just I'm thinking about how um, my husband's probably going to listen to this. My husband, he still has kind of like a diet mentality. And I foresee perhaps like some clashes between our views on food. And I also want to ask some of these questions for any other, couples who are dealing with, who have children and have different views on food. But I was just curious, like thinking about, okay, what happens if, my son is gaining weight and my husband starts to worry about that or think that he's eating too much? How would I approach that? Or how would we approach that with our son, or not? Like, would we have a discussion about it together before? Would I see my husband sort of saying, maybe, are you sure you're going to eat all that, to my son? And then we have a conversation about it. Like, how do you, I don't know. What are your thoughts on this? I'm sure that you experience this in your practice.
Oh, definitely. I think it's a very common, I mean, I was going to say dilemma. I guess it's a dilemma. These sort of values conflicts. And, you think about marriages, you think about co-parenting. Like there's plenty other domains where this happens, right? Whether it's around like screen time or I don't know. Some families want to insist on having a child say hello or thank you, and other values are like they will learn on their own. Don't interfere. Is tummy time necessary or unnecessary? It's like there's so many ways, right? I think that being able to be a united front and at least create optics that you're on the same page is essential. I think that the triangulation that can happen with kids and parents, again, just more broadly speaking, it's problematic, right? Those dynamics where parents are sort of undermining each other in front of kids. I say this as someone that like regularly does this with my own partner. But I do, those are the moments where I think, oof, I should have waited. That being said, I do think, like I'm a realist. You can't perfect, nothing's perfect, right? I think the more conversations you can have about the ways in which your values are different and how we're going to negotiate this, almost like establishing some ground rules, I think is important. And I think too, like, you asked both broadly and then more specifically around like a child's kind of micromanaging their portion amount, or more specifically, if they're gaining weight. Like, these are kind of hot topics, right? So if that is something that's happening, I do think it requires a lot of offline communication. And sometimes parents that are really struggling to have cooperative conversations do need a session with a professional, right? To sort of help almost mediate, right? Because if you're united in your goal to be a united front with your child and to respect each other, then that's fantastic. If you can stick with that, you'll find common ground. But it's like there's so many different ways that can go. But I do think that we want to avoid sending like super mixed messages, which, by the way, isn't the same thing as not being able to have different ways of being. Like, it's okay if your husband is has certain, I don't know, eating behaviors or even exercise habits, like that hopefully work for him, and they might look really different from you. I think about this with desserts. Like, I'm like I would eat dessert every day. I think that's just like an essential part of my life. But if my partner doesn't want to, or if that's not his, I don't feel like he needs to in order to model this. Like, daddy doesn't eat dessert as much as mommy. Like, too bad for him. There's lots of different ways to be. So it's a messy response. It's a complicated question. And I think so long as we're sort of regularly checking in with each other about like, are we modeling that we're on the same page? And then negotiating from there, I think that's a good way to think about it.
Yeah, that makes total sense for sure. Are there certain ways that you suggest to parents to speak to their kids when they're old enough about nutrition and exercise? I mean, because I remember it always just being kind of black and white, like not only black and white, but this is good and this is bad, or this will make you gain weight and this won't, or you should get into some kind of sport or activity so that you don't gain weight.
Right.
And it just like it took the joy away from movement. It caused me to avoid exercise for so long and to be also more focused on my body or the fat that I was gaining on my body as my body was changing through adolescence and things like that. So I'm just curious, what are some of the ways that you talk to parents about talking to their kids about food and nutrition, and maybe in the context of weight or not?
Yeah. I mean, I do think that sort of reverse engineering, right? Like we want to keep weight completely out of the conversation because, as you know, and hopefully your listeners know, there are just going to be kids in larger bodies and kids in smaller bodies. There's chihuahuas and bulldogs, and like there's nothing we can do about that. Like that's just the way bodies come. There's just real body diversity. So making sure that that's very clear in your values, in your representation in your home, in the books you buy, in the art you buy. Like we need to make it very clear that there's body diversity is real. I think that movement, like all bodies, generally speaking, want to move. I think there is an intuitive, impulse to move. Some kids end up almost like moving too much. If we think about like over exercise or compulsive exercise, like, that's something sometimes we need to look out for. And then some kids, whether they're feeling discouraged, like it doesn't feel emotionally safe for them to move their bodies, right? There are kids that sort of end up in a more sedentary situation. So I mean, there are kids need supports in different ways. But if weight is completely removed and we are just going to value movement in our family, again, without morality, I worry about families that are over identified as fitness families, for example, because there's just too much of your identity is sort of wrapped up in this, right? Like, but if you're just, we value movement because it feels good, it's something maybe we do together, it's really good for our mood, our mental health, like it's part of well-being. And I think with movement in particular, getting curious about what does your child like? How do they want to move their body? Not every child's going to play team sports or be an athlete, but that doesn't mean they can't find joyful ways to move. So I feel like that's the movement piece. I think with nutrition, it's really tricky because they're going to get so much unnecessary and often harmful nutrition information in school. That's a big problem that has not been solved for yet, unfortunately. But little kids don't need you to talk to them about nutrition. Like if we're doing our job as parents and we're serving a wide variety of foods, the food neutral normal isn't just we only serve candy. It's like we might put candy and the salmon on the same plate. Like that's the essence of food neutrality, right? And so if we're offering variety, it's like we're modeling we're going to try to eat as big a variety as we can. And we're not going to shame people who are struggling to eat more variety than others. Like, not everybody has that ability, and appreciating that it takes time to learn how to eat new foods, etc. So, to decouple the way we eat and the way we move from the weight we are, I think is essential. And that applies to kids in larger bodies too, because we want kids of all sizes to regard themselves as a worthy human being, deserving of nourishment and movement and joy and connection, etc. So, yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you brought in also a really good point of making sure that this applies to all children and all body sizes, because I think, it can be really common for, maybe one child, it's okay if they're eating the jelly donut because they're thin and they can. But if a child in a larger body is eating, they shouldn't be allowed to. And then they're treated differently. And that's where I think, you're talking about their sense of self becomes hurt because they're treated differently and they start to view their body differently, or their body as the problem.
Or their desire for the jelly donut as a problem.
Right.
And, you know, jelly donuts are yummy if you like jelly donuts. I'm more of a glazed or frosted person, but this it's it's so much safer. And again, like, this goes back to attunement too, like being able to attune to your child. And no child needs you to judge their instincts, to judge their appetite, to judge their appearance, right? Like, the whole concept of a body positive home, it's like you do want to create a soft place to land. And again, people hear this as like permissive feeding and like you eat whatever you want. Like, I don't know. That's not usually in most kids' best interest, right? Being able to have some scaffolding, some structure, some guidance, like that can exist, but it's not in the way we were taught, right? Don't eat this so you don't look like this, or exercise so you can like, it's not those lessons. I think it comes back more to like, listen to your body. How does your body want to move? What are you in the mood for? Do you like jelly donuts or do you like chocolate donuts? Which do you prefer? And ironically, that, right, if kids are more focused on who they are and what they want and need, they're less likely to binge on the jelly donuts that they learned were bad for them, or that their thinner sibling could have but they couldn't. It's just a recipe for like the opposite of what you want for them.
Yeah, I mean, that's the psychology behind it. Is if we tell ourselves we can't have something, or something is so bad we shouldn't have it at all, we're going to want it more. I remember going to a friend's house, and we were hanging out in her basement, and there were just like a tray of those. I remember this vividly, which says something, but they were a tray of white powdered donuts, and then beside it, like a huge bag of Smarties. And I don't know if I was thinking this or I asked her and just said, like, why aren't you eating all this? Like, look, it's right there. And she was just kind of like indifferent towards it because it's her house and she probably sees that all the time. Whereas I was like wanting to eat so much of it because, yeah, it was kind of labeled as something that was off limits. Do you find that that's a little bit more easily received by parents when you describe it like that, as opposed to morality?
Sometimes, yeah, I mean, I think they can often relate to that too. If you say like, don't think about a pink cupcake, it's like all you can think about. um They do. And I think you're appealing again to sort of what they want as the outcome, right? Like, I think that sometimes it sort of depends on what side, what corner of the internet you find yourself in, right? Like, I'll often hear from people that say, I was in this Raising Intuitive Eaters Facebook group, and I tried to ask a question about this kind of limit or something. And they said, oh, that's restrictive. And like, they were almost making her feel like any kind of limit she wanted to set was like, you know, a diet. And like, that's just not what she was trying to say. Right. And then, you mentioned being more, free with other people, and they say, oh no, that's so bad for a child, or so like, it just depends on where you go. But I do think if you say, listen, I want balance for your kid, like I want your kid not just to have one donut because that's what they think they should have, but because that's actually genuinely what they want. Or they want three, but they don't feel guilt and shame. And maybe because they're listening to their body intuitively, they just don't want another donut tomorrow, or maybe even for a week, because they've got their fill. And like, if I think if I sort of appeal to their concerns and then sort of connect the dots back to like, yes, and this is why either neutrality or more permission, they can kind of come on board. But trust is expectation met over time. So everybody needs to sort of see it unfold over time for themselves. It's like, I can't convince you of anything you haven't seen for yourself, right?
Of course, that makes sense. And what about if a child if they're expressing insecurities about their body, whether it's their weight or someone has commented on how they eat? How would you approach that with a child, or kind of coach parents to approach that?
I mean, it's really hard when that happens because I think we do all this work, and I hear from parents a lot. They're like, I did all the things, and they're still coming to me saying they hate their body or they hate their stomach or this person made fun of them. And, it's the most heartbreaking thing when our children are harmed or suffering. It's awful. And I try to remind everybody that if your kid is actually coming to you with their pain, right, with this experience they had, you've already done so much right because they're feeling safe that they can come and tell you. And if they can come and tell you, in some ways, your job really isn't to do anything, it's to offer so much presence and know that like you don't have to fix anything in that moment, to just offer empathy and like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you came to me with this. It is so awful, that feeling. And to remind yourself and even to say to them, you never have to feel this way alone, because that's ultimately what we want down the line, right? If you inevitably, as an adult, you maybe have a similar experience of a hard body moment or somebody makes a comment about you, it's part of resilience is being able to say, I'm having so much pain, I can't be alone with this, right? Whether that's outreach to therapy or calling a friend or calling a family member, like that's the skill we want to be building. So it's not so much I want to protect my kid from ever having these negative experiences, but rather make sure I'm modeling for them what self-compassion might look and feel like in them later on, right? So to be able to say, this sounds awful, this sounds so hard, tell me more, and make sure that sometimes you might also be discovering that they are having a preoccupation with this, right? It's different, a kid that's maybe having a hard body moment versus a kid that's having some kind of body image disturbance. So I think being able to suss that out becomes an important parenting skill too.
And how would you help parents distinguish the two?
I would say that if you're noticing one, sometimes these things are hard because they're internal, so you don't necessarily know or see. I think if your kid is incessantly, again, you have to also, it's a subjective interpretation, but if your kid is coming to you often with this concern, right, like a regular complaint to you, or it seems like it's lingering in their mind, right? If a kid is having a hard thought about their body, but then seems to be able to rebound and still put on their swimsuit and go swimming, right? Like that you're seeing that there's like a recovery process that happens, and that they're seemingly able, you might want to keep your eye on it if it's happening regularly, but that they're not changing their behavior as a result of the thought. I think it's safer. I think if you start to see kids that are really struggling with that, and then it's impacting their willingness to go to school or ability to get dressed, or pick an outfit because they just keep trying things on, avoiding situations, covering their bodies in ways that feel like incongruent with the season. Like sometimes it means that there is more of a preoccupation going on. And I don't want parents to feel like that's their job to figure out. That's, where having a professional come in to support both the parent and the kid might be essential.
Yeah, definitely. That makes sense. But back to your point about not feeling like you have to fix or prevent these things from happening to your child, it made me think about how, with a lot of my clients, something when they're still struggling with these chronic body image difficulties or eating issues, it often stems from that lack of acceptance from their parents. It's almost like their parents' opinions were really the most important. If they didn't feel accepted, if their weight wasn't accepted, or they can't let go of the comments that they received from the parents. So I think with you mentioning that, it's not about fixing it. It's just about being there, offering compassion and modeling that compassion to them so that they can have that and carry that with them in the future whenever they run into judgments or criticisms or insecurities about their body.
Yeah. I mean, and of course, I guess we should explicitly say it, with the absence of any negative commentary from you. Like, right? That is something that is in our control. We can, and some of us need to do some work in order to get there, but we can control whether or not we make negative comments about our bodies and our kids' bodies.
Yeah.
And the food choices, which is not the same thing as having structure around feeding. But if we're committed to making sure there's no negative food and body talk, that's not the whole thing, but that's an important piece, because then what you're describing, and it's so important to validate that experience that so many people have. I see that in my patients too. This like inability to really let go of these comments that were essentially traumatizing, right? From very important, trusted adults in their lives, grandparents, parents, like the person that's supposed to love you and protect you most, that said these very harmful things to you. You don't just let those go. But if we don't say those things, there's nothing to have to let go of,
Yeah, I'll let you go soon because this has been such a great conversation and I feel like I could go on forever. But why do you think those comments can come so easily from, usually it's older generations, have you gained weight? You should lose weight. And yet they're so deeply traumatizing for the person receiving it. Like our bodies feel so personal. And yet those comments are just delivered so, I want to say recklessly.
They are. I never really thought about that before. I mean, like the contrast between how easy they sort of fall out of the mouth and how deeply they land. I don't know. I mean, I think that they're at the surface for most people, or for the people that they come out of, in part because of the way they were raised, right? Mm-hmm. So I think somebody that's like loose-lipped with comments like that probably had someone that said those things to them and grew up in an environment where like that was just normal. I mean, I think there's a cultural component to it as well. I've heard from people from different cultures that speaking that way, it's almost like it would be really kind of subversive to hold a boundary with that stuff, because it's just not appropriate to hold a boundary. It's complicated because this is like our body autonomy that we're talking about in our boundaries. But I don't know. I don't know why then. Well, I think I know why they land so deeply, because they are violating. I think that's the problem. They come easily, maybe for a person that doesn't realize that they had also been violated. It just felt like normal, right? But they land so deeply because they are deeply violating. Nobody has a right to talk about anybody's body without their permission. And yet when it happens, and we don't know that, we just think that it must be us. We don't think, oh, this person just did something really bad. We think, oh, I must be really bad.
Yeah, definitely. There's a problem with me. There's a problem with my body, and there's a problem with me as a person.
Yeah, right. And again, it's one of my most trusted adults. Like, it must be true.
Yeah.
Why would I question it?
Yeah.
And so I think it does become very hard, people in their 30s, 40s who are sort of reckoning with it. And I find that one of the hardest things about like releasing those thoughts is that then you actually have to confront that somebody that really loves you really hurt you, and somebody you really love and sort of need to be very good is not all good. That there are parts of them that maybe it's hard to even see, right? So it becomes complicated psychodynamic work down the line, but they just, like your body remembers what it felt like, right?
Yeah. And maybe that's another reason why it's so difficult when you receive these comments as a kid, because you're not really wired to see your parents as someone who can make mistakes yet.
Exactly.
They have to be all good. Otherwise, your survival is compromised. And that's like, traumatizing in itself. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Something that most of us are working through now in our adult years is, accepting that our parents can make mistakes and that those comments didn't always mean what we felt that they meant.
Yeah. Or that they were right. I mean, sometimes parents are saying these things like to protect a child, right?
Right.
But yeah, sometimes the best protection is to not protect in that way, but rather to sort of stay present and allow our children to kind of develop, right? And sort of nurture their embodiment and hopefully a decent relationship with food and go out in the world and get hurt and come back and, support them. And as opposed to trying to like say all these things in an effort to protect, when those efforts often are very counterproductive.
Exactly. And so maybe the answer is, something tangible that parents can do is ask more questions or be curious in that non-judgmental way.
Mm-hmm. Always.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Zoe, for this conversation. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with listeners?
I mean, I guess just to be compassionate with yourself. I think that I find that a lot of parents that are most concerned with nurturing kids that have a like positive relationship with food and body or a better one than they had, like are people that have experienced a lot of harm and adversity in these issues. And I think in some ways it makes those parents almost uh, like rock stars when it comes to sort of prevention or to protection, because you really do know what you're trying to prevent from like what you're trying to keep them from, right? You've experienced all of this, and then sometimes that can lead to like overcorrection, and I think that as long as you're really centering like a connected, attuned relationship with your kid, it's like you don't have to get it perfect. There's no such thing. Like parenting is very messy, and you can always loop back and say, I really didn't like what I said about that, or I feel like I was being weird about the amount of ice cream you took. Like, oh, like, sorry. I don't know what that was about me. That had nothing to do with you. Like, there's space, especially as kids get older. So just offering parents, like, or reminding parents to stay self compassionate and honestly just know that you're doing your best and your parents did their best and it probably wasn't good enough, and same with us, but to kind of keep it real with yourself in that way.
Yeah, I love that. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Okay. And where can our listeners find more of you?
Yes, that's a good question. Well, you mentioned the Instagram at My Body Positive Home. I have a newish Substack, which has got a lot of material that parents can both read and engage with workshop wise, which I'll share with you if I haven't already. And then I guess those two places are probably the best places to find me.
Okay, awesome. I'll make sure that I put the links in the show notes so that people will be able to find more of you. And thanks
Great.
again.
Thank you.
Wow. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I love how this conversation kind of went in a bunch of different ways. If you have any follow-up questions or you want to dive deeper on any part of this conversation that I had with Zoe, please comment below. Let's continue the conversation and continue to build body resilience. Thanks for listening, and I'll chat with you next time. Bye.